Connie Dabate's life seemed like the kind that could be framed in glossy family photographs. She was known in her small Connecticut town as a friendly, warm-hearted woman who always put her family first. To neighbors, she was the type who waved from the driveway, remembered birthdays, and volunteered at school events. On the outside, her life looked steady, even enviable. She had a home in the suburbs, children she adored, and a husband who many assumed shared her devotion. To the casual observer, Connie had everything lined up in perfect order. Yet beneath this surface of calm and stability, fractures were beginning to form, the kind invisible at first but destined to widen over time. Connie's personality was one of trust and loyalty, qualities that made her beloved by those who knew her. But those same qualities also made her vulnerable. She believed in the goodness of people, especially in the man she had chosen to marry. She worked to maintain a household where love and routine kept everything moving. It was the kind of life she had dreamed of, simple yet fulfilling. But the whispers of tension had begun to grow louder, whispers that she either couldn't hear or refused to acknowledge. Friends occasionally noticed her husband, Richard, seemed distracted, sometimes cold, and often elsewhere when family needed him. Excuses were made, explanations accepted, and Connie carried on as though nothing was wrong. It's often said that betrayal begins in small ways. A forgotten promise, a late return home, a phone call taken in another room. These are the kinds of signs that start as background noise and then slowly swell into something impossible to ignore. Connie had moments when she may have sensed that something was not right, but she pushed them aside, as many do. She focused instead on her children and the comfort of daily rituals, telling herself that every marriage faces challenges and that things would balance out with time. What Connie did not know was that her husband was carefully constructing another life, one that had no place for her in it. She believed their bond was built on trust, but Richard had already begun to trade that trust for secrets. He played the part of a loving partner in public while hiding private choices that threatened to unravel everything. To Connie, life carried on with the steady rhythm of family routines, but in reality, she was walking unknowingly into the middle of a storm. On bright suburban mornings, Connie would step outside with a smile, talking to neighbors or tending to simple chores. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman in control of her life, someone who had carved out a safe and happy existence. Yet the true story was already writing itself in the shadows. Her life, which appeared ordinary, was moving toward a dark turning point. Each unnoticed detail, each moment of misplaced trust, was a piece of a puzzle that no one could yet see. The perfect life that Connie believed she was living was not perfect at all, and soon the truth would come crashing down with devastating force. Behind the closed doors of the Dabate household, a much different story was unfolding than the one neighbors believed. Richard, Connie's husband, was carrying the weight of secrets that contradicted the image of a devoted family man. While Connie focused on raising their children and keeping the home together, Richard drifted further into a hidden life that she knew nothing about. He had slipped into an affair, one that offered him attention and validation outside of his marriage. It began with small interactions that seemed harmless, but over time it grew into something deeper, something he could no longer explain away. With each passing day, the distance between husband and wife widened, and the foundation of trust began to weaken. Richard became skilled at deception, balancing two worlds with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The home invasion that Richard described began to feel less like a random act of violence and more like a carefully rehearsed story. Connie's death sent shockwaves through the community. A woman known for her warmth and kindness was gone, and the explanation seemed almost surreal. Neighbors were rattled by the idea that violent criminals could be roaming their streets. Yet within the walls of the police department, suspicion was already building. Something about Richard's story felt staged. Investigators were taught to trust patterns, and in this case, the pattern was not matching the chaos he described. The timeline itself became the first red flag. The window of time Richard claimed the intruder struck was unnervingly narrow, almost too precise. His recounting of events seemed rehearsed, as though he was reciting lines rather than reliving trauma. The injuries he displayed were inconsistent with the kind of violent struggle he described, more superficial than defensive. And while he spoke of panic and helplessness, his overall demeanor suggested calculation rather than shock. The tragic scene inside the Dabate home was not only the site of Connie's final moments, but also the opening chapter of an unraveling mystery. Investigators could sense that the story of masked intruders was not the truth, but a facade designed to mislead. What Richard did not realize in that moment was that every detail he gave, every inconsistency he overlooked, would be picked apart with precision. The day he thought he could control the narrative was the day the truth began to slip beyond his grasp. Detectives approached the Dabate case with patience and persistence, knowing that staged stories often collapse under the weight of evidence. Richard had spun a dramatic tale of masked intruders, but from the beginning the facts told a different version of events. Investigators carefully reconstructed the timeline of that December morning, piece by piece, and the cracks in his alibi widened with each discovery. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from a device Connie used every day without thinking, her fitness tracker. It silently recorded her steps, heart rate, and movement throughout the morning. According to Richard, she had been attacked much earlier, but the tracker told another story. It showed Connie moving around the house well after Richard claimed she had been incapacitated. Each step registered by that small band on her wrist chipped away at his credibility. Instead of supporting his version, the data revealed a woman alive and active at a time he insisted she was already gone. The deeper investigators looked, the more contradictions surfaced. Richard's computer searches painted a picture of a man preparing for an outcome rather than reacting to one. His online history included topics about home security, criminal investigations, and methods of covering tracks. There were also financial searches that hinted at concerns over money and the potential benefits of his wife's absence. These findings did not point to a desperate victim of random violence. They suggested a man calculating how to remove an obstacle from his life. Surveillance footage from nearby areas added another layer of doubt. Cameras showed Richard's car in places and at times that conflicted with his testimony. He had given authorities a timeline that positioned him outside the home when key events supposedly occurred, but the evidence showed otherwise. Even his phone records contradicted him. Calls he said he could not have made due to being restrained were logged at times that matched gaps in his story. Technology, impartial and exact, was dismantling his version of events piece by piece. Investigators also examined the physical evidence inside the house. The bindings on Richard's wrists were inconsistent with the violent struggle he described. They were loose and easy to remove, more like props than restraints forced on him by intruders. His injuries, which he displayed as proof of survival, were shallow and strategically placed, lacking the kind of defensive wounds common in true assaults. The more experts analyzed, the clearer it became that the scene had been staged to mimic a break-in. The portrait of Richard as a grieving husband faded quickly. Instead, a new image came into focus, a man who believed he could outsmart investigators by constructing an elaborate lie. He underestimated the precision of forensic science and the ability of detectives to find truth in the smallest details. The story he presented was collapsing, and in its place stood the chilling possibility that there had never been intruders at all. As each fact emerged, the question was no longer who had killed Connie. The evidence was pointing to Richard. The only mystery that remained was why he believed his plan could succeed. As the investigation drew to its conclusion, the picture of Richard Dabate's betrayal became fully visible. The elaborate story he had crafted, filled with images of masked intruders and sudden violence, had collapsed under the weight of evidence. What remained was a narrative of calculated deception, driven by selfish desires and the refusal to confront his own failures honestly. The betrayal was not just in the act of murder, but in the months leading up to it, when Richard allowed lies to guide his every move until there was no turning back. The motive was clear. Richard had entangled himself in an affair that had become more than a passing distraction. He had promised his mistress a future, spoken of new beginnings, and presented himself as a man ready to shed the burdens of his current life. But those promises could not exist alongside his marriage to Connie. Instead of seeking a truthful resolution, Richard looked for a way to erase her from the equation. The idea of living without consequences, of building a new life while appearing blameless, fueled his plan. Yet what he imagined as clever manipulation was nothing more than a trail of evidence waiting to be uncovered. In court, the betrayal played out publicly. The fitness tracker data, the computer searches, the phone records, and the staged bindings, all of it painted a portrait of cold intention, filet. Jurors listened to the timeline of Connie's final morning, the small, devastating details of her last steps, and the lies Richard told to cover them. Each piece of evidence added another layer of clarity, stripping away his rehearsed story and leaving only the truth. The intruders never existed. The attack was no random act. The crime was intimate, born not from chance but from betrayal within the home. For Connie's family and friends, the revelations were almost unbearable. They had trusted Richard, welcomed him, and believed he was a partner to the woman they loved. To hear that he had not only deceived her but plotted her death was a wound deeper than words could express. Their grief was compounded by the realization that Connie had never seen the danger coming. Her trust had been complete, and that trust had been turned against her in the most devastating way. The community, too, was shaken. The idea that such darkness could exist behind the walls of a familiar home shattered the sense of security many felt. Neighbors who once believed in the ordinary peace of suburban life were left questioning how well anyone truly knows the people living beside them. It was a reminder that betrayal often grows in silence, hidden until the damage is irreversible. Richard's conviction marked the end of the investigation, but not the end of the story. Connie's life became a symbol of trust violated and innocence destroyed by the one person who should have been her protector. Her case serves as a chilling reminder that betrayal can take many forms, but when it comes from within the circle of love and family, its impact is devastating. What began as whispers of infidelity ended as a haunting lesson in the cost of lies and the deadly consequences of unchecked deceit. Oh, thanks for watching A Timeline of Betrayal, the case of Connie Dabate. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more true crime stories, uncover hidden details, and keep the conversation alive. Stay tuned for the next case we uncover.